Top 5. Pilot saves plane from crashing. Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and click the notification bell for more updates. Number 5. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. A scheduled Aloha Airlines flight between Hilo and Honolulu in Hawaii on April 28, 1988. A Boeing 737-97 serving the flight suffered extensive damage after an explosive decompression in flight, but was able to land safely at Kahului Airport on Maui. Flight 243 departed from Hilo International Airport at 13:25 HST on April 28, 1988, with 6 crew members and 89 passengers on board, bound for Honolulu. After a routine takeoff and descent, the aircraft had reached its normal flight altitude of 24,000 feet when at around 13:48. About 23 nautical miles south-southeast of Kahului, on the island of Maui. A small section on the left side of the roof ruptured with a whooshing sound. The captain felt the aircraft roll to the left and right, and the controls went loose. The first officer noticed pieces of gray insulation floating above the cabin. The resulting explosive decompression had torn off a large section of the roof, consisting of the entire top half of the aircraft skin extending from just behind the cockpit to the forewing area. They performed an immediate emergency descent. The crew declared an emergency and diverted to Kahului Airport for an emergency landing. During the approach to the airport, the left engine failed, and the flight crew was unsure if the nose gear was lowered correctly. Nevertheless, they were able to land normally on runway 2, 13 minutes after the incident. Upon landing, the aircraft's emergency evacuation slides were deployed and passengers quickly evacuated from the aircraft. 65 people were reported injured, 8 of them with serious injuries. The one fatality, flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing, was ejected from the airplane. First Captain Madeline Mimi Tompkins, Captain Robert Bob Skornsheimer, and flight attendant Michelle Honda saved the passengers. Number 4. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. Boeing 737-7H for that experienced a contained engine failure in the left CFM56-7B engine after departing from New York LaGuardia Airport en route to Dallas Love Field on April 17, 2018. Captain Tammy Jo Schultz is an American retired commercial airline captain and former naval aviator, known for being one of the first female fighter pilots to serve in the United States Navy. The engine cowl was broken in the failure and cowl fragments damaged the fuselage, causing explosive depressurization of the aircraft after damaging a cabin window. Other fragments caused damage to the wing. The crew conducted an emergency descent and diverted to Philadelphia International Airport. One passenger was partially ejected from the aircraft. The flight crew conducted an emergency descent of the aircraft and diverted it to Philadelphia International Airport. One passenger sitting next to the broken window suffered fatal injuries and 8 passengers sustained minor injuries. The flight crew reported initial communications difficulties because of the loud noises, distraction, and wearing oxygen masks, but as the aircraft descended, communications improved. The captain initially planned on a long final approach to make sure the crew completed all the emergency checklists. Upon learning of the passengers' injuries, however, she decided to speed up the approach and expedite landing. Number 3. United Airlines Flight 811 was a regularly scheduled airline flight from Los Angeles to Sydney, with intermediate stops at Honolulu and Auckland. On February 24, 1989, the Boeing 747-12 serving the flight experienced a cargo door failure in flight shortly after leaving Honolulu. Flight 811 took off from Honolulu International Airport at 1:52 local time, with 337 passengers and 18 crew members on board. During the climb, the crew made preparations to detour around thunderstorms along the plane's track. The captain anticipated turbulence and kept the passenger seatbelt sign lit. The aircraft had been flying for 17 minutes. As it was passing from 22,000 to 23,000 feet 6,700 to 7,000 m, when the flight crew heard a loud thump, which shook it. About a second and a half later, the forward cargo door blew off. It swung out with such force that it passed its normal stop and slammed into the side of the fuselage, bursting it open. Pressure differentials and aerodynamic forces caused the cabin floor to cave in, and 10 seats G and H of rows 8 through 12 were ejected from the cabin. A gaping hole was left in the aircraft, through which a flight attendant, May Sapalu in the business class cabin, was almost blown out. Senior flight attendant Laura Brentlinger hung onto the steps leading to the upper deck and was dangling from them when the decompression occurred. Passengers and crew members saw her clinging to a seat leg and were able to pull her back inside the cabin, although she was severely injured. During the descent, Captain Cronin ordered flight engineer Thomas to tell the flight attendants to prepare for an emergency landing, but he was unable to contact them through the intercom. As the airline neared the airport, the landing gear was extended. The flaps could only be partially deployed as a result of damage sustained following the decompression. Captain Cronin was able to bring the aircraft to a halt without overrunning the runway. About 14 minutes had elapsed since the emergency was declared. All the remaining passengers and flight attendants exited the aircraft in less than 45 seconds. Number 2. Air Transat Flight 236. Air Transat Flight 236 was a transatlantic flight bound for Lisbon, Portugal, from Toronto, Canada, that lost all engine power while flying over the Atlantic Ocean on August 24, 2001. The Airbus A330 ran out of fuel due to a fuel leak caused by improper maintenance. Captain Robert Pitch, 48, an experienced glider pilot, and First Officer Dirk Jagger, 28, glided the plane to a successful emergency landing in the Azores, saving all 306 people. Most of the passengers on the flight were Canadians visiting Europe or Portuguese expatriates returning to visit family in Portugal. This was also the longest passenger aircraft glide without engines, gliding for nearly 75 miles or 120 kilometers. Following this unusual aviation accident, this aircraft was nicknamed the ESO's Glider. Flight TS-236 took off from Toronto at 0:52 UTC on Friday, August 24, 2001 local time, 20:52 ET, on Thursday, August 23. Bound for Lisbon, Portugal. There were 293 passengers and 13 crew on board. The flight was flown by Captain Pitch, who had 16,800 hours of flight experience, with 796 of them on the Airbus A330-12, and First Officer Dirk Jagger, who had 4,800 flight hours. It was powered by two Rolls-Royce Trent 770-60 engines capable of delivering 71,100 thrust each. Leaving the gate in Toronto, the aircraft had 46.9 tons of fuel on board, 4.5 tons more than required by regulations. At 4:38 UTC, The aircraft began to leak fuel through a fracture which had developed in a fuel line to the number 2 right engine. At 5:03 UTC, more than 4 hours into the flight, the pilots noticed low oil temperature and high oil pressure on engine number 2. Captain Pitch suspected they were false warnings and shared that opinion with their maintenance control center, who advised them to monitor the situation. The pilots received a warning of fuel imbalance. Still unaware of the fuel leak, they followed a standard procedure to remedy the imbalance by transferring fuel from the left wing tank. The transferred fuel was lost through the fractured fuel line, which was leaking at about 1 gallon per second. The pilots decided to divert to LaGuardia Air Base in the Azores. They declared a fuel emergency with Santa Maria Oceanic Air Traffic Control 3 minutes later. Without engine power, the plane lost its primary source of electrical power. However, the aircraft lost its main hydraulic power, which operates the flaps, alternate brakes and spoilers. The slats would still be powered. The airbase was sighted a few minutes later. Pitch had to execute 1360-degree turn, and then a series of S-turns to dissipate excess altitude. The plane touched down hard, approximately 1,030 feet past the threshold of runway 33, at a speed of approximately 200 knots. Maximum emergency braking was applied and retained, and the plane came to a stop after a landing run that consumed 7,600 feet of the 1,000-foot runway. 14 passengers and 2 crew members suffered minor injuries, while 2 passengers suffered serious injuries during the evacuation of the aircraft. The plane suffered structural damage to the main landing gear and the lower fuselage. Number 1. British Airways Flight 5390. British Airways Flight 5390 was a flight from Birmingham Airport in England for LaGuardia Airport in Spain on June 10, 1990. An improperly installed windscreen panel separated from its frame, causing the plane's captain to be blown partially out of the aircraft. With the captain pinned against the window frame for 20 minutes, the first officer landed at Southampton Airport. Atchison handled a routine takeoff at 8:20 local time 07:20 UTC, then handed control to Lancaster as the plane continued to climb. Both pilots released their shoulder harnesses, and Lancaster loosened his lap belt. At 8:33:07:33 UTC, the plane had climbed through about 17,300 feet. Air Steward Nigel Ogden was entering the cockpit when there was a loud bang, and the cabin quickly filled with condensation. The left windscreen panel on Lancaster's side of the flight deck had separated from the forward fuselage. Lancaster was propelled out of his seat by the rushing air from the decompression and forced head first out of the flight deck. His knees were caught on the flight controls, and his upper torso remained outside the aircraft, exposed to extreme wind and cold. The autopilot had disengaged, causing the plane to descend rapidly. The flight deck door was blown inward onto the control console, blocking the throttle control, causing the aircraft to gain speed as it descended. Ogden rushed to grab Lancaster's belt, while the other 2 air stewards secured loose objects, reassured passengers, and instructed them to adopt brace positions. The plane was not equipped with oxygen for everyone on board, so Atchison began a rapid emergency descent to reach an altitude with sufficient air pressure. He then re-engaged the autopilot and broadcast a distress call, but he was unable to hear the response from air traffic control because of wind noise. By this time, Lancaster had shifted several inches further outside, and his head was repeatedly striking the side of the fuselage. The crew believed him to be dead, but Atchison told the others to continue holding onto him, out of fear that letting go of him might cause him to strike the left wing engine. Eventually, Atchison was able to hear the clearance from air traffic control to make an emergency landing at Southampton Airport. The air stewards managed to free Lancaster's ankles from the flight controls while still keeping hold of him. The aircraft landed at Southampton, and the passengers disembarked using boarding steps.